Good morning. This is the LaRouche Organization Daily Update for September 18th. First of all, let me say that I participated in some wonderful activities on Sunday and Monday. Sunday, the 9/11 Memorial Concert of the Schiller Institute NYC Chorus, which I founded over 10 years ago in 2014, which always does a 9/11 Memorial Concert. This time, the Cherubini Requiem, which was really a wonderful experience. And people can visit the sinycchorus.com website to take a look at that performance. Then on Monday, I participated with the Integrity PAC and many other organizations, along with veterans Josephine Gilbo, Hani Nofal, and Lieutenant Colonel retired Tony Aguilar, in a rally press conference at the United Nations to demand that they invoke Resolution 377A, Uniting for Peace, to create the conditions where aid to Israel is stopped. Israel, frankly, should have its privileges at the UN suspended until it stops its genocidal assault on Palestine, and to get a blue helmet operation to protect the delivery of humanitarian aid. The speeches were very, very hard hitting, particularly Colonel Aguilar, who is very direct, very personal, very subjective, because when he volunteered to work for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which turned out to be working for a U.S. contractor under the directorship of the IDF, he naively believed that he was going there to help feed people. And what he discovered is that he was participating in a genocide where people who walked miles in starving, hot, horrible conditions to get food would be shot if they got in the wrong place or the food ran out or whatever. And he is not afraid to discuss that. And he's been briefing congressmen and anyone who would listen. So those two activities, Sunday and Monday, and then an evening event also featuring Father Harry Burry, who is a 95-year-old Catholic priest. He's been a priest since before I was born. He became a priest in 1955, famously chained himself to the U.S. Embassy in Saigon, and had a great deal to say about nonviolent resistance and also the urgent need for economic development, particularly the Oasis Plan. So now President Trump is in London. He just last night had this very stately, ornate dinner with King Charles, and all kinds of royals were there. What is going on? Well, the British have to get their president under control. They were very fearful. We know that in 2019, the British House of Lords wrote a whole report about how President Trump could not be allowed a second term because it would jeopardize the US-UK special relationship. They have been deeply alarmed about his talks with President Vladimir Putin, his efforts to end the Ukraine war, which is a great source of money, propping up the bubble of derivatives obligations held by the Bank for International Settlements, the Bank of London, and of course the New York Federal Reserve. God forbid we stop fighting and that money stop flowing into weapons. Now, why they don't just turn and build infrastructure? You know, they're not into that. These are very evil people committed to reducing the world's population. Infrastructure doesn't do that. So Trump is there. They're really working him over. They're showing him a special exhibit of documents and photographs celebrating the US-UK special relationship. Never mind that the British Empire killed about 80 million people in India of starvation, millions in Ireland of starvation, created Zionism, which is right now carrying out a genocide in Gaza. Never mind all that. Never mind what the British did to their former subjects when we were her subjects in the American colonies, impressing people to fight in the Navy, torturing people in the American Revolution. Forget all of that. The British are our best friend. Aren't we just like them? That kind of thing. It's very dangerous, very bad. It's a real weakness on the part of President Trump that he is so susceptible to pomp and circumstance. That is very much not the American way. So while Trump is being wined and dined and charmed in London, 250 American state legislators are over in Israel. I forget the name of the conference, 50 states, one Israel, something like that. And I'm embarrassed to say that it sounds like they did recruit legislators from each of the 50 states. However, with the exception of the state of Georgia, I was not able to find the names of any of these people, probably because they realize it might really backfire. The American people are sick of arming the Israeli assault on children in Gaza. The American people want no part of this. They don't like AIPAC. They don't like the Zionist lobby owning our politicians, making them deaf to us. So it is next to impossible to find the names of which of these legislators went on this trip. But I would encourage you to find them, figure out who from your state went there, and then do everything you can to run against them and get them defeated in the next election. Now, otherwise, on the question of 377A, Uniting for Peace, what we have been picking up around the United Nations is that a number of nations think that they don't want to do this for various reasons, one of which, absurdly, is that the Palestinian Authority doesn't want to bring it up because they don't want to offend the United States. I guess they're still hoping for something from the United States and ruin the relationship between the United States and Israel, which really makes no sense to me. But it means that nations other than the PLA, nations that are prepared to stand opposed to the United States in this, which has vetoed every single ceasefire resolution, would have to do this. My view is that the most important thing to make this work is we have to change the United States. I think we're very near a break point. Israel has lost all credibility. In fact, even President el-Sisi used the word enemy to talk about Israel at the Doha summit of the Islamic Cooperation Organization. Egypt has not called Israel enemy since 1977, so that's a very big deal. Now, in other news, Keith Kellogg is in Ukraine, saying things that are completely have no relationship to reality, saying that, quote, if Putin was winning, he would be in Odessa. If he was winning, he'd be west of the Dnipro River. If he was winning, he would have changed the government. Well, hey, maybe Putin didn't want to do all those things. Have you ever looked at a map? Have you ever studied the size of the Russian army relative to the number of troops left alive in Ukraine? Russia is not losing. I don't know if the guy actually believes this or if he's just a British agent, but there he is in Ukraine once again. Maybe he's getting a lot of money for this. It's hard to know. Then on the Charlie Kirk assassination, and I know Harley has spoken about that, warning people not to fall into the camps, the left-right divide, but to think strategically. I would say this absolutely was directed at President Trump. There are various theories about whether Netanyahu was involved. Apparently, a Ukrainian member of parliament is saying Zelensky was involved, that Zelensky was involved in the attempted assassination of Trump. And this, I would remind everyone that Netanyahu and Zelensky are both tools of this dying Anglo-Dutch empire. It's the same thing. That's why it's going to be very, very hard for President Trump to get a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia if he remains captive of Miriam Adelson, Bill Ackman, and others. In other words, the Zionist lobby, which really is the British Empire. Now, on this, Tucker Carlson has spoken out on this question of limiting freedom of speech. He talked about Pam Bondi, who said on September 15th, there's free speech and then there's hate speech, and there is no place, especially now after what happened to Charlie Kirk, in our society. And Carlson said, there's no sentence that Charlie Kirk would have objected to more than that. And you've got to think the Attorney General didn't think it through and was not attempting to desecrate the memory of the person she was purporting to celebrate. You hope that Charlie Kirk's death won't be used by a group we now call bad actors to create a society that was the opposite of the one he worked to build. For those who don't know, Charlie Kirk was famous for holding these giant debates. He had a tent, in fact, even when he was assassinated, a tent that says, "Prove me wrong," where he just loved debating with young people. He did not want to silence speech. That doesn't mean he was right in all of his opinions, but dialogue and debate are really a very, very important part of the American system. So finally, in Poland, you heard the story about the alleged Russian drones flying into Poland. It turns out the home that was damaged by a Russian drone was actually damaged by a Ukrainian air-to-air missile that didn't get off properly, but we probably will never hear about that. So it is urgent. This is the 250th year of the Declaration of Independence of our United States. We fought a war of independence against the British Empire. That was not so we could be like them. We don't want leaders that are leaders because of how much money they have or that they come from a particular bloodline or gene pool. Our Declaration of Independence mandates consent of the governed, that every single human being is equal, that every human being could be prepared equally to direct the affairs of the nation, and that the American people choose, they elect with their vote someone that they feel will represent their interests. That's the system we are supposed to have. That is not the British system. And I would encourage everyone to do all you can to mobilize against this, particularly right now. Please call your congressmen and your senators. Call your state house, find out who are those compromised individuals who slithered off to Israel on this trip. Make sure they get defeated, and tell your congressmen that if they don't stop sending money and weapons to Israel and Ukraine, you're going to do everything in your power to make sure they're not reelected. See you soon.